Hello everyone, Apple Demo here. Today I wanted to make a more personal kind of video. A video on, well, why I collect Apple prototypes. I've been asked this question over the course of numerous years that I have been collecting them, and it usually is followed by confusion or just genuinely someone being curious as to why I would collect something like this. Why do I sink sometimes thousands of dollars into these really obscure devices that to most people would just kind of seem like old obscure development technology? I have multiple reasons for collecting them, which I'll go over each and every one, but I would say probably the biggest reason that I have is just the sheer history behind these developmental devices. Each and every single one of these devices has its own story. They're all what ifs instead of what was. Even the tiniest of hardware changes inside of any of these prototype devices had a reason as to why it was changed. And you also have to think, an Apple engineer held the device that you're holding right now and used it to develop an extremely successful product that had tons of revisions upon revisions upon revisions to finally get it into a state where millions of people bought it. And then of course, once this device served whatever purpose it was meant to serve, maybe it was being used for drop testing, or maybe it was being used to refine the software, whatever it was. This prototype device was pretty much sentenced to be destroyed, and at some point down the line, managed to get out of that destruction process. Now I will say up front, all of the devices that I do have and have purchased have all come from either eBay or other similar e-commerce websites, or alternatively have come from recycling facilities. Now, I have heard stories of other prototype devices, particularly the newer ones I found, that have, escaped in more, you could say, not great ways. But for me personally, I try to stay well away from that, which is mainly why I do collect older devices to begin with, because these are the kinds of devices where Apple just really doesn't care about them, particularly when they're, I would say, over at least 3 years old. They've kind of served whatever purpose they are going to serve. They're not current generation of anything. So that's why you will typically find them at recycling facilities instead of Apple destroying them themselves. But in terms of how these devices actually did manage to escape, that definitely is a part of the history. But this now brings me to my second point, which is the hunt in trying to find these very rare devices. I'll still never forget the first prototype that I found, quote unquote, in the wild, which basically I just mean it was a prototype listed on eBay, which it wasn't listed as a prototype, but the seller didn't know it was a prototype. The prototype itself, comparatively speaking, is nothing special, but there's just a certain exhilaration in finding that prototype where no one's really gonna know what it is, and the seller certainly didn't know what it was, but it's just so rare and historical, and it's almost unreal in a way. Now, of course, the prototype that I did find, it's not an original iPhone prototype, it's not some amazing rare device with a bunch of hardware differences, it's actually just an Airport Extreme. But this Airport Extreme that I did find was for only $1, and it actually had a red logic board inside, which, for my first prototype, I certainly was not complaining, but it was just all about actually looking for a prototype and then finally finding one in the wild. It was just amazing, and I'll still never forget that feeling that I had. Which now brings me to my third and final point, which is prototypes, in a way, kind of bring collectability to otherwise pretty cheap Apple devices. Now, an example that I'll use is, say if you wanted to go out and purchase an iPod Touch 2nd generation. Those aren't exactly rare by any means. Just looking at eBay during the making of this video, I can already see that there's 364 of them, and you can actually purchase them for like $15, which is obviously by no means a collectible item. So you may then think, oh, well then why don't you just pick up a sealed iPod Touch 2nd generation? Well, first of all, the ones that are currently sold are for $154, which are still relatively collectible, not exactly like, rare, because you could still just go on eBay and buy one whenever you want. But for stuff like that, it could be fake. Now, I will say there have been fake prototype devices, which that'll be an entire future video in itself, but there's definitely not as many people faking prototypes than there would be for something more generalized like sealed devices. But my point is, prototypes are generally one of one items where there's only one of it like it, and every prototype is unique in its own way. But what this translates to is if you want a prototype of a specific device, it's probably going to be pretty hard to find someone who even has it, let alone is willing to sell it, which of course adds to the whole collectability and rarity aspects. But anyways, those are just my reasons why I personally like to collect Apple prototypes. Of course, you may have differing reasons. Maybe you're someone who is interested in Apple prototypes but may not want to collect them. Maybe you are thinking about getting into collecting them, but I just wanted to give my take on all of it. If you are interested in actually seeing these Apple prototypes that I've been talking about, go check out my prototype playlist because that has tons of my Apple prototypes in it. Anyways, thank you for watching.